Now sometimes you get a fish that ends up becoming quite aggressive, and regardless of what the species of fish is, it's really important to consider removing that fish, because if it's going to harass your fish and it keeps on doing that, then it's really not going to end well. And sometimes it can be a species of fish that you don't expect to be aggressive. So if you sit back and watch it and you do notice it picking on the other species, then regardless of how much you like that fish, you've either got to remove it or admit that you're probably going to end up with one fish. Because when fish attack other fish, it's not just the damage that the fish make when they bite the fish, it can also be the damage that the fish make when they get scared and run into things. But also it can be that over time the fish's immune system falls, and then they can also get sick from other reasons just by being run down. So it's very erratic. He sort of looks like he's just got way too much energy. Like an ice stock fish. When you go to remove fish from the aquarium, it's quite a good idea to place a bunch of nets into the tank and let the fish get used to the nets being there before you try to catch the fish. Because once you do have a grab at trying to catch the fish, if you miss the fish, then you're not going to get another shot. Missing the fish on the first go will probably require removing every single thing in order to catch the fish. So no pressure. So for this tank, my favorite food is Spectrum's probiotics because it's super clean. I also like to add Dainichi color because that really helps the color of the fish. And then other than that, sometimes you get picky fish that want to feed on things like frozen food. So just having a good range of frozen food is really the key here. So irregularly feeding a nice treat for your fish with a range of different foods is a very, very good idea. And I really rather this be a treat as opposed to a main food. But with some species of fish, you don't get that choice because some species of fish just don't want to eat the pellet food. The other thing we're going to add is some copepods, because having more copepods in this environment will also create micro life that will allow the fish to nibble around as well. A very strange situation occurred here. This crack in the corner was clearly leaking the other day, but seems to have stopped leaking. This area is now dry when that was clearly dripping. So obviously this corner has suffered a whack, but due to some luck, it seems to have stopped. Now these fish are not quite ready to come out of quarantine yet, so the choice is, do we put the fish in the main tank or do we risk leaving the fish here for longer knowing that that drip might start again? Heads you win, tails you lose. Luck. Now we have to make a decision. These fish need to either go into the main tank now or we need to leave these fish in here for another month, because the fish in the main tank have had a stressful situation because the stripey has become aggressive. Now whenever you get an aggressive fish and you see stress on the fish, what you're actually supposed to do is let the fish settle down, which let's call that 3 to 4 weeks. Then you wait a month before you introduce new fish, and that would reduce the stress significantly. Now the disadvantage of doing that would mean that these fish would need to be in this tank for a further 2 months in order to safely complete the quarantine period. And considering this tank has a chip in it, which was previously leaking, that means my doubts in this tank holding without taking it apart and resealing it is very low. So this is one of those damned if you do or damned if you don't things, because if we do not put these fish into the main tank, especially after we've just caught that fish out and created a disruption, we may end up with this tank leaking, or we put these into the main tank, which is a more ideal situation for these fish, but will mean that the quarantine period has not been adequately respected, and the fact that the fish in the main tank have been stressed after being beaten up by the stripey means that their chance of parasitic infection is increased. So there's basically no answer here, and it is just luck, and it is just, if you feel lucky putting them in the main tank and not getting white spot, or you feel lucky leaving them here and hoping the tank doesn't leak. So the water quality in here at the moment, pH is fine, slightly low but fine. There's a tiny bit of nitrite, there's no ammonia, and the temperature's 24, and the salt level is just over 0.021. So the call has been made to introduce these fish into the main aquarium. Now the risk of that is that the fish in the main aquarium have experienced stress in reference to an aggressive stripey, but the risk of keeping them in here is that this tank has got a crack in it, and if it did start leaking, then that would be potentially very disruptive. The leak seems to have stopped somehow. So we're going to put these fish into the main tank, and we're going to cross our fingers. Now, if you are going to run a quarantine tank, it's very important that you regularly test your water, especially for things like pH, which can easily drop, and nitrite, which can easily increase. And if you are seeing issues with your water quality, you do need to be doing quite regular water changes, particularly in an unestablished environment like a quarantine tank. Regular testing and regular water changes and plenty of oxygen is really the key to making sure that your fish are healthy during this period. One of the absolute best things you can do for any saltwater aquarium is to sometimes renew its copepods. So you've got amphipods, copepods, and various microorganisms, and they end up being a wonderful food source for any of these plucking fish, and they're wonderful scavengers to run around the environment and help to control nutrients and eat any fish waste and so forth. So just on a semi-regular basis, just tip it in, and then these little organisms are going to go throughout the environment, and they're going to hide in the sand and hide in the rocks, and they'll be a wonderful food source and wonderful little scavengers, particularly if you've got any finicky fish that are slow to feed, particularly things like mandarins, pipefish, pufferfish, anything like that. And often if you look at your aquarium at night time, you'll see these little organisms running around, like the worms in the compost heap. So now we've given the skimmer a clean and given the tank a water change.
They wanted a breakdown for the renderer.
Yeah, what do you want me to tell?
Where you get everything in-house so the boys can do the work. So I have the paint, I have this, I have that, I have this, I have that. Once you have...
Now a careful eye will need to be kept on these fish for the next couple of weeks, because we've now removed the stripey that was being a little bit aggressive, and we've also added a couple of fish that were in quarantine. So we're going to have to keep a real eye out for white spot. Now we have dropped the salinity to about 1.018, so therefore the white spot isn't going to like the fresher water. And we've got a nice big UV on the tank, so that should be able to do its job. So it's really just a matter of trying to keep the lights out as much as possible right now, and keep an eye on the fish and look out for any signs for white spot, especially for the next few weeks.